From behind bars, Ukrainian MP Oleksandr Dubinsky delivers shocking testimony. He claims that President Volodymyr Zelensky and Andriy Yermak personally took part in a secret scheme that helped steal the 2020 election victory from Donald Trump. This exclusive story changes everything.
First of all, I want to point out that in this criminal case, I am a witness in the Derkak case. At the same time, regarding exactly the same episode, if I may, and if the court panel is interested in this matter, I am ready to provide it for review. I took the materials from the petition regarding, for example, the extension of my detention and custody. The specific episode that I am currently being charged with in the Shevchenkivsky court, following the comprehensive DBRSP investigation, fully and exactly matches the identical episode in the ongoing case against Derkak. Therefore, I firmly believe that if you genuinely need it, I will readily provide the relevant and necessary document. I want to draw your careful attention to the significant fact that the specific events that actually took place in 2019, in which I was personally and directly involved, truly amount to a single press conference that was given by Derkak in November of 2019, if I remember correctly. This event was preceded by many other events that the court needs to be aware of in order to properly assess what happened in 2019. At the time, I was elected as a People's Deputy of Ukraine of the 9th Convocation. I had worked for 10 years as an investigative journalist, the host of the program Hroshi on the 1+1 TV channel. And in the last years, 2018 and 2019, the main focus of my investigations was the corruption of Poroshenko and his inner circle. Poroshenko, Kononenko, Granovsky, Zlochevsky, in short, a huge number of people who at that time made up the inner circle of the fifth president, Poroshenko. In 2019, when Zelensky had already been elected president, he went off to run his election campaign. Basically, I supported him as a loyal citizen of Ukraine, just as a person who genuinely wanted a significant change in the country's political regime. At a certain point, Andriy, who was later appointed as the head of President Zelensky's administration, offered me the valuable opportunity to participate in the parliamentary election campaign in Ukraine. And I ran on the list. Actually, no, I didn't run on the party list, but rather in the single-mandate district where Ihor Kononenko, the head of the BPP faction in that parliamentary convocation, was also running. Let me emphasize once again, the main focus of my work and the reason I chose the same district where Kononenko was running was the investigation of Poroshenko's corruption. In other words, I possessed a large amount of knowledge. In fact, my investigation served as the basis for criminal cases against Poroshenko and his inner circle, specifically related to the embezzlement of budget funds by Poroshenko. Since for many years before that I worked as a financial journalist and economic journalist, I focused specifically on financial schemes, embezzlement of funds from the Ukrainian budget. And that's why the focus of my attention was, in particular, the National Bank of Ukraine and the schemes that were carried out through the National Bank of Ukraine, as well as the so-called brokers of domestic government bonds. In other words, the government securities that were supposedly bought by private investors to finance the significant budget deficit actually belonged to powerful Ukrainian oligarchs and influential politicians who greatly profited from these illicit schemes. So, what is the point of this scheme? That is, when you, as the President of Ukraine, control the National Bank of Ukraine and the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine through the parliament, the resources that have been moved offshore or are located in offshore accounts, whether they are there legally or illegally, I won't get into that now, you can invest them in the Ukrainian economy. For example, if your money is sitting in Cypriot accounts, it earns 0%, while at that time Ukraine was paying 12% per annum in dollars. Accordingly, this was a super profitable scheme for the authorities in power, which had been used since Yanukovych's time. This scheme existed both under Yanukovych and under Poroshenko. I think
that we still need to interrupt you because your explanation about certain crimes is not relevant here.
No, this is not about a case, not a crime. No.
Let's do it this way. We won't listen to your lengthy explanation. Let Denishka speak. If you want to give testimony, especially regarding your communication with Derkak or the press conference, you can do so. Yes, absolutely. Look, then literally,
I don't
have hope. Yes, literally.
She got her dose. The only thing I wanted to clarify is that we attached the letter as evidence, which included the expert analysis. The expert said that in the RADA, if there was misinformation about the facts presented at the press conference, it was considered a violation. If it wasn't misinformation, then everything we presented in court at the press conference. As I understand it, Mr. Alexander clarified that the information announced at the press conference was misinformation. No.
Nothing at the conference. We just haven't yet
gotten to it. 2 hours, I'll very briefly connect what I said earlier with what you asked, with the direction you asked me to continue from. So these particular stories that subsequently came up and were discussed at the press conference in November of 2019 were directly related to my speech and the statements I made at that very same press conference. It concerned the significant withdrawal of substantial funds from the state budget of Ukraine during the presidencies of both Viktor Yanukovych and Petro Poroshenko, with the direct mediation of companies directly owned by the then head of the National Bank, Valeria Gontareva. This, in fact, is why I began to make such a statement. This is the so-called scheme involving domestic government bonds. One of the elements of this domestic government bond scheme, among others, was the company Burisma, owned by Mykola Zlochevsky. So that's how it all ties together, and why I started with such a lengthy introduction. So the primary reason I initially started by clearly stating that I was actively investigating Poroshenko's various activities is precisely because, when I was duly elected to parliament, I consistently had regular and important meetings at President Zelensky's official office specifically on this very significant topic. The overarching aim was to effectively utilize the considerable opportunities generously provided by robust parliamentary oversight and the thorough investigations I was diligently conducting into Poroshenko's undeniably corrupt actions to successfully convert them into concrete and impactful legislative changes that would meticulously close existing gaps in the current laws and in the National Bank's comprehensive financial regulations, including crucial measures specifically designed to prevent the widespread embezzlement of valuable state budget funds. In addition, a significant political goal for Zelensky in 2019 was to hold the then incumbent Poroshenko fully accountable for the various alleged crimes committed throughout the entirety of his presidency. And in fact, the November 2019 press conference with Derkach was preceded by several other truly significant and important events that absolutely cannot go unmentioned or overlooked when discussing the full context and implications of this particular press conference and its surrounding circumstances. In the first days after being elected as a people's deputy, I tried to, or actually registered, a draft resolution to establish a temporary investigative commission to look into embezzlement at the National Bank and the Ministry of Finance. This draft resolution and the creation of the temporary investigative commission were rejected by the Verkhovna Rada, specifically by the Servant of the People faction. I publicly stated this in 2019 in response to the demands of the International Monetary Fund, which did not want investigators, including parliamentary investigators, to get involved in the issue of embezzlement of financial aid, including grant structures. After that, a temporary investigative commission on international corruption was registered. And when the official registration of this temporary investigative commission on international corruption was taking place, the significant initiative to cooperate with Derkach came directly from the office of the President of Ukraine. And let's just say, the significant actions that were actually taken in parallel with the official registration of the temporary investigative commission, they clearly appeared after the corresponding and much anticipated press conference. I brought with me the articles of the Rules of Procedure of the Verkhovna Rada, but I think that if necessary I can...
Through the launch side, documents can be submitted directly.
There was a joint process, a press conference, and after the press conference, letters were sent by American senator and congressman. The temporary investigative commission was registered. I will hand over this document. Of course, I just want to share a few quotes. I understand this perfectly. That's why I asked. Of course, this is just for clarification. So temporary investigative commissions of the Verkhovna Rada, according to the regulations of the Verkhovna Rada, can be initiated by any member of parliament, but they are created by sending letters proposing the creation of any temporary investigative commission to all parliamentary factions and groups of the Verkhovna Rada. And these parliamentary factions and groups, if they consider it necessary and important to create such a temporary investigative commission, delegate their members to the composition of the commission. Accordingly, every temporary investigative commission that I initiated myself and later with the participation of Derkach was registered in coordination with the head of the Servant of the People faction, Arahamia, who personally provided, according to the rules of procedure of the Verkhovna Rada, a list of all the members, giving the majority to them. I determined the composition of all the members of the temporary investigative commission, as well as the candidate for the head of the temporary investigative commission. Therefore, the initiative basically came from Dubinsky and later from Dubinsky and Derkach, or Derkach and Dubinsky, whichever way is more convenient for you. But the decision about who will be members of this commission, who will be the head of this temporary investigative commission, whether it can be registered or not, is first made by the factions and groups of the Verkhovna Rada, and after that by the Rules Committee of the Verkhovna Rada. Only after the Rules Committee decides that these documents can be submitted for a vote in the Rada are they submitted and voted on. I want to draw your attention to the fact that without the decision of the head of the Servant of the People faction, Arahamia, the Servant of the People faction as such, investigative commissions could not have been created in the Verkhovna Rada and still cannot be created to this day. This is a decision of the coalition, and since our coalition has the majority, it is essentially the decision of a single faction. I want to really emphasize that I did not participate in the publication of the so-called Biden-Poroshenko tapes. I was just present at one specific press conference where the discussion was about the company Burisma and Hunter Biden's significant earnings from that. At the same time, after the publication of the Biden-Poroshenko tapes, at the initiative of the head of the Servant of the People faction, Arahamia, a temporary investigative commission was established. A draft for the creation of such a commission, for which I have the relevant documents. In this commission, Serhiy Demchenko, a member of parliament from Servant of the People, was appointed head of the temporary investigative commission, and the majority of this commission consisted of members from Servant of the People. For what purpose was the commission created? For what purpose? To investigate the Biden-Poroshenko tapes. This is a significant commission that was formally initiated by the political party known as Servant of the People. I particularly emphasize this crucial point because my direct participation in the press conference with Mr. Derkach was also intrinsically connected to the undeniable fact that this entire initiative actually came directly from the office of the President of Ukraine. At that specific time, as I clearly understood it, during the months of October and November in the year 2019, it was primarily and specifically aimed at thoroughly investigating various complex schemes involving the inner circle of Poroshenko. In my detailed testimony, which I conscientiously gave to NABU in November of 2023 and again in May of 2023, I very clearly and precisely indicated the specific meetings I had at the office of the President of Ukraine, exactly who was present at those particular and important meetings, and precisely what was discussed and deliberated upon there. It's truly important to pay close attention to the significant fact that in this particular and rather complex criminal case, I was initially a crucial witness for NABU, and they thoroughly and meticulously investigated my participation in this specific press conference. They ultimately found absolutely no credible evidence of any crime whatsoever there. I was formally summoned to testify as a key witness, specifically asked to provide relevant and comprehensive testimony, and that's precisely what I did. I meticulously described exactly how it happened, precisely as it was, and I carefully prepared this detailed account for the NABU investigator and personally handed it over. As a direct result of giving this extensive testimony, it subsequently turned out, well, as the complex situation gradually unfolded, that I genuinely don't know anything at all about the Poroshenko tapes. I have absolutely nothing to do with that particular matter, but the significant press conference where Burisma was prominently mentioned was actually initiated by the office of the President of Ukraine, and as soon as I gave this important testimony, criminal cases immediately started being fabricated against me. By the way, for a very similar episode, I regrettably ended up in pre-trial detention in November of 2023. I just want to draw your serious attention to this crucial point. Why? Because my personal opinion and firm conviction is that after I gave this testimony, which clearly shows that it was specifically the office of the President of Ukraine that was behind this entire matter, and I'm not particularly interested in whether it was with Russian intelligence or not, but the undeniable fact is that the initiative to create temporary investigative commissions and to publicly publish these tapes came directly from the President's office. I am a direct and undeniable witness to these significant events because Zelensky and Yermak personally discussed this extensively with me. Moreover, Yermak personally came to meet me. I live at Poshtova Square in Kyiv, specifically in the Podil district. He personally came to meet me at the Fairmont Hotel, and in the lobby he explicitly told me that I urgently needed to cooperate with Derkach, that this was incredibly important information, that it absolutely needed to be supported, that he was actively helping us. So I just want to draw your serious attention to the undeniable fact that after I gave the relevant and comprehensive testimony to NABU, a criminal case was immediately published against me for a very similar episode, which is precisely what I started with. That's why Derkach is currently being prosecuted in the NABU case, and for the very same thing they're trying to prosecute me in a separate case being actively investigated by the DBR and SBU and now being carefully considered by the Shevchenkivsky court. I'm saying this because, in my considered opinion, This particular case, for which I've been in pretrial detention for 2 long years, was deliberately fabricated against me in order to effectively neutralize this crucial testimony, because this testimony clearly and unequivocally points to the direct involvement of the President's office in a campaign that could very well be called interference in the American elections of 2019 to 2020. And I want to draw your attention to another incredibly important thing. When Dubinsky spoke at the press conference with Derkach in 2019, 5 days before that, I think the press conference was, if I remember correctly, on October 19th or November in 2019. I genuinely don't remember the exact date. 5 days before that, the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine officially published, or it was widely published in the media, a suspicion against Mykola Zlochevsky, with explicit references to all the relevant files concerning all the detailed information about Burisma, Hunter Biden, and the substantial payments he received through Burisma for his valuable services as a member of the supervisory board of Burisma in Ukraine. So, what Dubinsky talked about at the press conference, I think I personally said only 2 or 3 brief sentences about Burisma, was absolutely not inspired by any Russian intelligence, as the press often tries to present it, or as they're now actively trying to falsify in the criminal case against me. These were materials that were officially or unofficially, it truly doesn't matter. The suspicion officially published against Mykola Zlochevsky contained all this specific data. As an investigative journalist, I thoroughly read this information on the internet, and when I went to the press conference to talk about Poroshenko's various crimes, including through such intricate schemes, because it was through Poroshenko's schemes that money was systematically funneled through companies using subsoil use systems. I just used this as a current and pertinent example at the time. Our press conference was on the 19th. Again, I don't remember if it was November or October, and 5 days before that, this suspicion had already been widely published on a bunch of different websites. What's particularly interesting is, as far as I vividly remember, the High Anti-Corruption Court was already actively considering a plea deal that Zlochevsky had made, admitting his guilt for giving a record $5 million bribe to close this very criminal case I'm talking about, the suspicion for which was formally signed against him in October of 2019. And as far as I understand, the verdict is classified for some unknown reason, but as far as I know, Zlochevsky admitted his guilt for this suspicion that the prosecutor's office brought against him in 2019, and then for the subsequent attempt to bribe Kolodnitsky to close this very significant case from 2019. Later in the year 2023, Hunter Biden, relevant documents can also be readily provided by the defense team, admitted his guilt in receiving illegal income from the Ukrainian company Burisma from the perspective of American law, and in failing to properly pay taxes on the substantial funds received from Burisma as an American citizen. This significant event happened in the summer of 2023, after which he was subsequently pardoned by his father, who at that time was the sitting president of the United States, Joe Biden. So, in fact, I am not talking about Derkach. The investigation into what Derkach said at those press conferences is your question. As for what Dubinsky said at that press conference and what concerned Dubinsky's connection with Derkach, I relied strictly on the facts that had at that time been made public by the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine, either directly or indirectly, and in any case they were in the Ukrainian mass media and were no secret to anyone. The Burisma topic was no secret to anyone in 2019 when I was at the press conference. Later, throughout 2020 to 2023, these facts were fully confirmed in the part that I spoke about. Both through Zlochevsky's admission and the plea deal involving an admission of guilt and payment of the corresponding fines to Ukraine's budget, as well as the relevant plea agreement with the investigation on the part of Hunter Biden. I would also like to draw your attention to another point, which shows that the office of the President of Ukraine was directly involved in 2019 to 2020, and that the Servant of the People faction was connected to these press conferences. I can now read out the official statement by Oleksandr Kachura, which specifically took place on May 19th, if I recall correctly. Derkach then publishes the very first part of the highly anticipated Biden-Poroshenko tapes on May 19th in the year 2020. This truly significant event happens exactly 1 full day before, as they consistently keep postponing the final press conference summarizing Zelensky's entire presidency. The initial part of the Biden-Poroshenko tapes is indeed published a full day before that particular and crucial event, as previously mentioned.
It is May the 20th day of the current month, today.
2020. Next day, official transcript of Verkhovna Rada, Oleksandr Kachura, Servant of the People faction. You know, colleagues, Ukrainians, yesterday we were truly shaken by new information made public by one of our people's deputies, a representative of entire parliamentary convocation, Derkach. We are simply shocked by information made public. A preliminary analysis has been conducted. The Prosecutor General's office fulfilled its duty by entering information into the Unified Register of Pretrial Investigations and initiated criminal proceedings under Article 111 of the Criminal Code, State Treason, and Article 364, Abuse of Official Position. against Petro Poroshenko. Unfortunately, he is not present today. He did not find time to Parliament, but we will stand firm that the investigation must be conducted as objectively as possible. And law enforcement agencies no longer need to go to bank to coordinate procedural actions. We have relieved the State Bureau of Investigation, blah, blah, blah. That is why, under the chair, on May 20th, 2020, together with my colleagues, we are creating a temporary investigative commission to look into these facts that were made public. Applause. Conversations with Joe Biden, conversations with John Kerry, and the information that was made public by Robert Giuliani, these are absolutely outrageous facts, criminal activities. And we will do everything to ensure that an independent legal assessment is conducted on all these cases and that a final decision is made on all of them. This is what we campaigned on. This is what we will stand for. We are implementing the demand for justice because in Ukraine we have equal rights for everyone, unequivocally. The facts that we obtain within the framework of the Temporary Investigative Commission, we will hand over to law enforcement agencies and the court will make a decision on this matter. I am passing on the defense's efforts in the relevant excerpt from the press conference speech by Oleksandr Kachura in the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. If the court in the deliberation room, if there is such a desire,
Essentially, if you are really going to do that, indeed,
study Kachura's speech, watch the video recording on the Rada TV channel's website. At that moment, the entire parliamentary faction is standing around Kachura at the podium during his speech. That is, for me, this is indeed yet another piece of evidence, simply a clear confirmation of my words that the President's office was directly involved in promoting this specific issue. Let me also remind you that in May of the year 2020, Serhiy Volodymyrovich Vovk, a distinguished judge of the Pechersk court, made this truly perfect and exclusive decision of the Pechersk court. On April 21st, in the year 2020, he specifically ordered the Prosecutor General's office to formally enter the name of Joe Biden into the Unified Register of Pretrial Investigations, providing a brief summary of the significant events. This was a crucial directive indeed, and it certainly warrants our careful attention and consideration. The Pechersk court ordered the Prosecutor General's office to enter Joe Biden into the Register of Pretrial Investigations. Obviously, in my considered view, this particular situation was widely and extensively covered in the mainstream press precisely to use this as a convenient media pretext to widely spread the false information that Joe Biden was directly involved in actively pressuring Prosecutor General Shokin and in alleged corruption within Ukraine. That is, in April 2020, just as today, the Pechersk District Court, this is my personal conviction, is under the complete control of the Office of the President of Ukraine, and no other decisions can be made there, especially on such matters, except those dictated by them.
this miracle of communication with Dyrkach, maybe, any circumstances that are still unknown? Yes. Yes, definitely.
Are you asking about communication with Dyrkach? That is, I want to draw your attention to the fact, and I mentioned this in my testimony, which I fully stand by, the ones I gave during the judicial investigation, and they are completely accurate. There may be a discrepancy of 2 or 3 days in the dates, but unfortunately it's been 6 years since then, so I might be slightly off with the dates. But the main point is this: my communication with Dyrkach was limited to interactions with him in the Verkhovna Rada hall. I wasn't acquainted with him before the parliamentary term. I knew who he was because I had worked as a journalist for many years, so I knew who Dyrkach was, but I didn't know who his father was. I saw him in person for the first time in August, at the end of August when I took the oath in 2019, and I probably got to know him sometime in September. So he personally came up to me, asked something, so I've known him since September and October of 2019. My interactions with him were strictly and solely limited only to the relevant press conference and the corresponding investigative commission. I want to strongly emphasize that particular point and make it abundantly clear. I am a very public person, and throughout my entire career, including when I became a member of parliament, I communicated that I was creating investigative commissions, that I would be investigating the embezzlement of international funds, embezzlement and machinations with government bonds, embezzlement at the National Bank and the Ministry of Finance. This was the topic I was working on. That's why Dyrkach, at some point, through the mediation of the President's office, I want to emphasize this, appeared only because he had his own plan. He was acting on his own behalf. I had nothing to do with his part, what he was talking about, or what he intended to publish. So I handled my part after coordinating with the President's office, and it concerned the corruption of Poroshenko and Gontareva. That's the extent of all my interactions with Dyrkach. At the same time, I had Again, I might be mistaken, but most likely only one, at most 2 meetings with Derkach, but probably just one. It was in Derkach's office during the preparation for that press conference. I'm saying this openly, there's nothing secret about it. So naturally, when organizing any joint event, people meet and discuss the timing at the very least, who says what. We didn't coordinate theses with each other, I didn't see his materials. I always speak on my own, I don't need any papers, I don't rely on any documents, even if I need to quote something. Everything is in my head, so my materials are just me. And I didn't show him anything, didn't send him anything, and he didn't show me anything either. We just voted on who would speak and in what order. That's all there is to it. That's the entirety of my interaction with Derkach. I want to emphasize, which is particularly important for the court, that after this significant press conference with Derkach, a considerable number of letters were subsequently sent to American congressmen and senators. And these important letters were not actually about Burisma, but since we held a joint press conference and were planning to set up a temporary official investigative commission, we signed them together, Dubinsky and Derkach, Derkach and Dubinsky. These significant letters primarily concerned, in rather general and broad terms, the alleged widespread embezzlement and misappropriation of crucial international financial aid by various Ukrainian governmental and non-governmental entities. The money that was allocated for the reform of the Prosecutor General's office, where did it go? The money that was allocated for the fight against corruption, where did it go? They did not directly concern American citizens. They did not specifically concern the company Burisma or Hunter Biden. Rather, they were primarily about the overall effectiveness of spending international financial aid on those crucial processes in Ukraine that were funded by international financial technical grants and assistance, such as the vital creation of robust anti-corruption structures, including the High Anti-Corruption Court. This was money primarily coming from various donor organizations, and the crucial question at that particular time was simply how effectively and efficiently it was being spent. So just to strongly emphasize this important point, this situation had absolutely nothing to do with any specific American issues, any particular Russian issues, or indeed any broader political issues whatsoever, because it was exclusively and solely about how much and in precisely what manner specific Ukrainian officials systematically stole from specific grant-funded organizations and the associated grant money. And what else did I want to draw your attention to?
The notifications have been handled required. All the documents you want to submit to Strana Zakstu, you still have them. Please bring them with the report. Well, that's basically everything.
Well, if we were to give one now, and we are currently at about the 290th transfer, then we would still be stuck in some kind of endless loop.
Yes, so
that's basically the whole story. An important point which, well, doesn't directly relate to my participation in the press conference, but does concern the essence of the questions. In the spring of 2020, I was invited to the office of the President of Ukraine. At the meeting, Yermak was already there. He was the head of the President's office, Zelensky, Yermak, Kirilo Timoshenko, Shafir, and a few other people were present. I was invited, and of course the topic of holding Poroshenko accountable was going really well. We're working on it, and this work needs to continue. Derkach has some interesting materials related to corruption. So it would probably be good to help out a bit more with cooperation. For what? I didn't know about the release of the tapes. I had no idea what it was about or what documents he was preparing. Derkach, I mean. It's just that by that time Derkach had already used my last name several times in some of his slides that he published in his international exposés on corruption or something like that. I refused to work with him because I didn't need that. I never had any goal to associate myself with him. I never had any such intention. So by that time, I had already given several interviews. I brought them with me, and if the defense is interested, I can provide them. That the use of my last name in some of Derkach's communication campaigns was absolutely not authorized by me, and I did not take any part in it. I simply made a few more statements after our press conference, as was appropriate. Later on, when the tapes were actually published, that's why I remembered May 19th and 20th, 2020. On May 19th, there was the publication by Prona. On May 20th, the President's press conference, I read you Kachura's statement from May 20th. And on May 20th, the President of Ukraine at the press conference says that these tapes have been published. There's Rada Poroshenko. The Prosecutor General's office is already investigating Poroshenko for treason. That is, According to the concept that I know, this was indeed a carefully planned operation, the primary purpose of which was specifically to hold a significant press conference before President Zelensky's important speech so that he would then mention it on the anniversary of his presidency and use this as a crucial informational pretext to formally open a criminal case for treason against Poroshenko, which is exactly what was ultimately done at that particular point in 2020. That's all. After that particular point in time, as far as I can remember, I had no further communications on this specific topic regarding the tapes starting from that moment onwards. In other words, I absolutely refused to participate with Yermak in the publication of the very first part, observed this entire story from the sidelines, watched closely how this whole process truly unfolded, how it all really played out around this significant story, and that's it. After that, I had nothing more whatsoever to do with it. In November of 2020,